Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I know we have people joining this event today from around the world. I am delighted to welcome you all to this discussion on the prospects for gender equality, 75 years after the founding document of the United Nations set out to reaffirm faith in the equal rights of women and men. My name is Nathalie Sammersinger. I'm the Chief of Strategy for the UN's 75th Anniversary Initiative. And it is a huge pleasure for me to moderate this session today, which is jointly organized by the government of Mexico, co-host of the Generation Equality Forum to be held next year. And I'll be handing over to Her Excellency, the Vice Minister, in a few minutes to tell us more about that. It is also organized by the group of women leaders, Voices for Change and Inclusion. This is a really inspiring group of senior women, some of whom I've had the great pleasure of meeting, who have joined forces to call for a more inclusive, effective, transparent, and accountable global system. I'm so pleased we have two representatives of the group on the panel today. And it's also jointly organized by In Mujeres, which is graciously hosting our live stream today. So thank you, Dr. Gazman, for your support. And finally, my office, the Office of the Special Advisor on the UN 75th anniversary. So this year, 2020, was supposed to be many things. The start of the decade of action for the Sustainable Development Goals, the crunch time for action on climate change and biodiversity loss. And it was supposed to be a super year for gender equality with the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Conference, the 20th anniversary of Security Council Resolution 1325, on Women, Peace and Security, the 10th anniversary of UN Women. But of course, we all know this year is not really going to be remembered for any of those things, unfortunately. In fact, this has been a year where we have seen setbacks in our progress, and many would say some tempering of our ambitions. The COVID-19 pandemic has reversed development gains that we made over decades in a matter of months. We've seen the first rise in extreme poverty in over 20 years, the first drop in human development in about 3 decades. And as so often, we've seen that women and girls are being disproportionately affected, whether it's disruption to education, job losses, wider impact on the economy, the impact of COVID-19 restrictions, including, of course, gender-based violence. And the pandemic has also, I think, made very, very clear the long-standing structural and systemic inequalities that women and girls face on a daily basis. At the same time, it has also shown once again that women are not only on the front lines of the impacts of a crisis, but also on the front lines of the response. So as we plan for recovery, we cannot aspire merely to return to normal, because normal wasn't working for many of us. That message emerged loud and clear from the global consultation that the United Nations conducted this year to mark its anniversary. So far, over 1.3 million people and tens of thousands of organizations in all UN member and observer states have taken part through surveys and through dialogues and events such as this one. And they have told us 3 things. 1, they believe global cooperation is essential, not just desirable, not just important, but essential to addressing the challenges we face. 2, they have clearly said they want action on inequalities in the short and in the long term. And 3, they have said they want bold, transformative change of our societies, economies, and institutions. Our big challenge will be to rise to these expectations. The results of the UN75 consultation were presented to world leaders in September, when the General Assembly adopted a declaration on the anniversary. In this declaration, member states pledged to respond to our global conversation and tasked the Secretary General with making recommendations on how to do so. This event today is intended to support that process and also to look ahead at the Generation Equality Forum next year. And I'm very delighted now to hand over to Her Excellency Marta Delgado, the Vice Minister for Multilateral Affairs and Human Rights of Mexico, who will deliver some welcome remarks to set the scene for today's discussion. Over to you, Vice Minister.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to share this opportunity and this forum with my dear Nadine Gassman, President of In Mujeres in Mexico. Her Excellency Susana Valcorra, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Argentina, and now Chief of Staff of the UNSG and member of the Group of Women Leaders. Angela Kane, former UN High Representative for Disarmament, former UN Under Secretary General for Management and member of the Group of Member Leaders. Of course, Natalie Samarinye, Chief of Strategy of the Office of a Special Advisor on the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. Thank you for the moderation, Natalie. And Annika Jane Dorothy, Executive Director of the Green Congress of Kenya and Generation Equality Youth Task Force member. And everyone, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Good afternoon. My distinguished colleagues and the audience, greetings from Mexico City. It is a pleasure, of course, to welcome all of you to this discussion, which is a part of a series of virtual dialogues organized by the Office of the Special Advisor of UN75 anniversary and the Group of Women Leaders, Voices for Change and Inclusion. The government of Mexico, we are very, very glad to co-host this event in partnership with these relevant allies. And in particular, we appreciate the invitation to join this dialogue on gender equality at UN 75th. Gender equality agenda needs to be at the center of a global conversation about the future we want and the UN that we need. And now, in this pandemic context, it's very important to robust the multilateral effort and strengthen the multilateral institutions. The coincidence of the 75th UN anniversary with the commemoration of the 25 years of the adoption of the Beijing Platform of Actions is really, really keen to this idea, a landmark document that provides us today the best guidance to the advancement of women and girls, gave us a lot of hope and energy to move forward and accelerate the implementation of the commitments therein. So with that spirit, we joined the initiative to co-host with France the Generation Equality Forum, convened by UN Women with the leadership of civil society organizations and also, of course, with feminist movements around the world. The engagement of the Mexican government with the forum is a part of our feminist foreign policy and to honor the legacy of Mexico as host of the first conference of the advancement of women in 1975. So one of the main objectives of the forum in the mobilization of women voices and feminist movement energy is to address the resistances that we are facing for the achievement of a very crucial objective, which is the realization of the rights of the half of the humanity for the well-being of the whole society. So the forum will have an intergenerational focus with the youth at the center and recognizing women and girls in all their diversity with an intersectional approach that will address the specific challenges of the most vulnerable ones. The outbreak of COVID-19 and their consequences has shown us the vulnerability of the multilateralism system, as I said. In this moment when we need multilateralism more than ever as the only way to build back better together. The impact of the pandemic is the economical and social field is huge as the sanitary effects that it has. In this regard, Mexico is proposing a high-level event under the auspices of the President of the UN General Assembly to address the economic and social sustainable recovery. We are convinced that we need to build a new economic and social contract with all partners involved, and that is also the message that my President and the Minister of Foreign Affairs gave yesterday and in the G20 forum. In this regard, if we are going to build back better, we need to recover with gender lenses and with different parameters. It is a fact that the pandemic has put in the surface with all it harnessed the structural inequalities that millions of women and girls face every day. So women are in the front of the line of the healthcare systems around the world. They are the more frequent victims of domestic violence. They have the burden of care work at home. So the domestic workers, most of them women, are at most risk, and women are more also affected by conflict situations and violence. Besides, the lack of access of sexual and reproductive services have been aggravated in this pandemic context, and the voices and the leaderships of women in all the fields are still missing. So for this reason, and despite of the obstacles that have been imposed by this challenging context, we are convinced that the Generation Equality Forum can provide a breath of fresh air because the forum is about an innovative alternative on multilateralism in action. So this is a multi-stakeholder format. Member states, in partnership with civil society organizations and feminist movements, with private sector, foundations, international organizations, UN agencies, and academia, will mobilize efforts and identify commitments and actions for gender equality. So as a result of the forum, 6 action coalitions will be launched on gender-based violence, economic justice and rights, bodily autonomy and sexual and reproductive health and rights, feminist action for climate justice, feminist movements, and leadership technology, and the last one, innovation for gender equality. So also a compact on women, peace and security and humanitarian action will accelerate the implementation of the Security Council Resolution 1325. A main result of the forum will be the discussion on the innovative approaches and commitments that need to be taken to address the structural obstacles that prevents gender equality, as well as the strengthening of strategies of feminist movements as the force for structural changes. I am sure that with the group of these extraordinary leaders that are here with us now today, we will have a very, very interesting conversation that will be very useful also for the substantive preparation of the forum, but also to contribute to the UN75 global conversations and to the final 75 report that will be presented by the UN Secretary General next January 2021. So thank you very much. I am very excited for the launching of these initiatives in this scenario. And now I want to give the floor to the moderator, Natalie Samaraninga. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vice Minister, for also giving us some hope, especially in the lead up to the forum. And thank you again for all of your support. We're still in the position today worldwide where we just have 1 in 5 ministers across the world who is female. And the representation is very much lower in foreign affairs and defense affairs and budget. So I think you are really showing us again how important it is to have women, to have feminists in leadership roles. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to turn now to the exceptional panel of leaders that the Vice Minister introduced in her remarks. So I won't introduce them all again, but we have, a real pleasure to have Susanna Malcorra, Andrea Kane, Annika Jane Dorothy, and Dr. Nadine Gassman. And if I may break with protocol and call you by your first names, I hope you won't. I hope you won't take offense. But thank you so much for joining us and giving of your time. We're going to have about 45 minutes or so to have a discussion. I think we're going to try and cover as much ground as we can, given your expertise spans about everything we really need to be considering: human rights, economic justice, climate justice, peace and security, intersectionalism, feminist movements. So we'll try and do that, but it would be great to try and keep a focus on what can be achieved at the forum next year, and ultimately also on recommendations that we can present to the UN leadership and ultimately world leaders, as the Vice Minister mentioned, as the conclusion of our 75th anniversary campaign. So I'm going to start with some questions, but I'll also leave some time for audience questions at the end, and I'll try and get some in if they match with what we're talking about during the session itself. So don't wait to post your comments. You can do it on the UN75 Facebook page or the In Mujeres Facebook page where the live stream is. Just leave a comment in the chat. We'll have people monitoring that, and I'll try and weave them in when I can. So let me start then with my first question to all panelists. What, in your opinion, has been the biggest impact or achievement that we have seen in the years since 1995, when the Beijing conference, adopted this landmark roadmap for gender equality? And maybe you can also say if you think that progress is now under threat, or if you think that there are some gains that we have actually been able to bank. And let me start with you, Susanna, if I may.
Thank you, Natalie, and it's a pleasure to be here with such powerful group of women, Annika, Nadine, Angela, and yourself, Natalie. And again, thanks to the government of Mexico and to Martha for her kind introduction. Well, I think what was the most remarkable achievement that came out of Beijing was this structural agenda moving forward that set the framework for policy development and in all countries of the world. And the peer pressure that was constructed around the fact that the UN was the space where this was discussed. To me, and this is one of the reasons why we have established our group of women leaders, Voices for Change and Inclusion, we believe that this association between multilateralism and gender issues is absolutely fundamental, because it was only under such a pressure that the public policy agenda moved forward in many parts of the world. Otherwise, we would have not made the progress we made. So it's not only that there was a decision taken in Beijing with an amazing forward-leaning agenda, but it was an implementation plan that was followed through the yearly meetings of the CSW and the peer pressure again that created. So to me, that's structural. There is no other way to move forward this very, very important progressive agenda of rights for women than the one that was set up. Having said that, I believe that that agenda is under threat. I believe that there is a coalition of interest people that put this agenda in conflict with the notion of the family rights, which is absolutely unacceptable. But that has grown, and it has grown to the level that we have seen. We have seen recently in the fact that the CSW has not been able to really discuss the agendas before the member states, has not been able to move ahead with the many remaining subjects that we have in before us. So as much progress as it has been made, the threat is there. There is a concerted effort to go against the agenda. And I am convinced that we have to have a concerted effort to push forward and to really counter this notion of a pushback against the agenda. And that's why I so much appreciate the work that the government of Mexico is leading together with the government of France, because we need to recreate momentum, we need to recreate the pressure, and we need to make sure that that notion of setting the bar high for policy, further policy development remains, and we do not accept going backwards.
Thank you. I have a follow-up I want to ask you already, but I'll save it and bring in Angela to the conversation as well. What do you think has been the biggest impact or achievement since Beijing?
Well, thank you very much. And first of all, again, also thank you to the government of Mexico for spearheading this. And I'm absolutely delighted. It's so rare. There's an all-women panel. I'm sure we all can say that. So it's just great to see good friends and also make new friends on this panel. I must think that 45 years ago was the first Mexico conference. That's a really long time. You know, we now talk about 20 years of Resolution 1325, 25 years after Beijing, the implementation plan. And I agree with Susanna entirely that what is really important is to have goals, to have achievements, and to basically have posts that you can follow, and what is the implementation and where is the success and where have we fallen short. So there's a lot of it that can be done. But when I look back, and I will come back a little bit to also the difficulties that we're having right now, is when we have looked back at what has happened in the last couple of years, is also that the world has become so much more violent, so many more conflicts. It's more prone to greater readiness to use force. And what has happened is that really affected women and children to a large extent. And COVID has further exacerbated, and I think we can come back to that a little bit later. But if you think about the situation that we have now, I also want to talk a little bit about the achievements, because you have to also see what are the achievements, and we have to hold on to these achievements. We don't want to let them go. We don't want them to backslide. And I think that the commitment to women was really reinforced when the Peace Building Commission was established. And then there was a Security Council resolution that focused specifically on sexual violence and armed conflict. I mean, that was an absolute departure from anything that the Council had ever discussed. And the issue of women, peace, and security was made the first thematic agenda. Again, that was a huge step forward. And now it is part of the agenda, and I don't think that can be undone, but other things can be undone. And I think that Susanna already briefly talked about this. And when we look at the Security Council, and that really sets the tone, and it has also set the tone just last month when you had the annual consideration of the Resolution 35 review, is that in April last year, already there was a threat by the US to veto a draft resolution on conflict-related violence because it was on sexual violence and reproductive health, even though the same language had already been included in previous resolutions. So it wasn't something that was new. It had already been established as a marker, so to say. And while the resolution was ultimately adopted, I think the negotiations were proving extremely, extremely difficult. So that was a year and a half ago already. So that was foreshadowing what was happening. And then in October last year, you had very contentious negotiations on the resolution on the women, peace, and security agenda. And it has become very clear what this year showed also just last month, that you didn't have a resolution. And in fact, the countries that did not support the resolution in the Council basically were congratulated by advocacy groups saying, we're so happy you didn't support it, because it was something that did not contribute anything to advancing the agenda. And here, that is the point. We need to advance the agenda. We need not be content with what has already been achieved, which possibly could be rolled back. But on the other hand, we need to advance the agenda. And when I think about the other aspects that are so important, Susanna has mentioned already the Commission on the Status of Women, but also UN Women was established 10 years ago. And when you look at the website of the UN Women, you see that there are action plans, there's implementation. You look at the Sustainable Development Goals. Where are we with the Women, Peace, and Security agenda? That is extremely important, that we can follow that and that we can say, this is what we need to really push forward. And to my mind, this is where we also need to just make more progress. It's not only the member states. We focus now on the UN, we focused on the member states, but it is, and I'm very happy we also have civil society representatives here, because it's really important that the civil society also pushes that jointly forward with us. And when you look at what civil society, this international NGO that is an umbrella organization on this agenda, they put forward a roadmap, and they basically brought it to member states and sort of said, this is where we want to go. Is it going to happen? Maybe not immediately, but I think that's groups like the group of women leaders and other groups really can put their shoulder to the wheel and push this forward, that we can see actual achievements. And I'm very happy when the Vice Minister mentioned the action plan and the implementation that's coming forward from this progress. I think that is extremely, extremely helpful. And also what you, Natalie, said about the UN75 consultation, whatever can be taken from this very large number of people who responded to the to the appeal and also to the request for input, that would be very, very helpful for us to see. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will actually put out a quick follow-up, actually, maybe to you, Angela, and to Susanna. I mean, Angela, you mentioned the backlash. Susanna, you talked about the importance of multilateralism in really pushing the agenda forward. But we're at a moment now that's perhaps very different to 1995, when there's much more skepticism and, you know, a tendency to really push back against international institutions laying down these sort of, you know, big agendas. I mean, the last time we had this sort of 5 years ago, the Sustainable Development Goals and so on were very different beasts. Even the Paris Climate Agreement was very much based on sort of more, you know, peer-generated commitment. So do you really think that that same kind of pressure can be brought to bear in this age? Maybe Susanna, you could come in first, and then Angela.
Well, of course, the challenges are very, very high, no question about it. But what we see is that there is no other way than to overcome these challenges than finding ways to come together around issues. I think that sometimes sorry about that. Going back to what I was saying, the only way to come around these challenges is to concentrate on issues. And concentrating on issues means that you need to choose which are the things that really make the most difference. And when you look at the figures around gender, there is no question that addressing the gender equality is one of the most impactful things that we can do. So instead of discussing in theoretical terms, we need to look into what is that women contribute and how women are impacted if things are not really move forward in the right direction. Women have a level of impact that is absolutely amazing, for the good if we move right, or for the bad. You know, 47 women are assumed to be pushed into extreme poverty after this pandemic. Clearly, women have been disproportionately affected. It's also clear that the gender pay gap between women and men is around 35% throughout the world, and most likely to get even worse after this pandemic. It is absolutely clear that this is much worse in the case of the developing countries, where 70% of women are part of the informal economy, which, as we know, has gone very, very, very bad during the pandemic. Women contribute to 37% of the GDP of the world. Aren't we going to think about solutions that really bring them on board? So we, in my view, need to change the acts of the conversation. We need to make the conversation around issues, specific issues, and the impact on those issues for all of us, for the better functioning of the world. And there is no other way to do it than in the multilateral world. Of course, there is pushback, but we need to organize themselves, and that's what I think is being done these days, around those questions that really are most impactful, and we focus on them. So there is no other way to do it than through these means, which are absolutely challenged, no question. But it's also true that we are more organized than ever before to react to those challenges. And most importantly, we are not women alone. There are many men who are convinced of this, that this is not only a question of right, it's not only a question of justice, it's a question of economy, it's a question of the right level of development, of a sustainable development. So we just have to go for it, no other way.
Thank you very much. And I should also just make clear, we've been running these all-female panel sessions on a host of issues, always through a feminist lens. So it's not that we didn't have men on this panel because they weren't interested, but we just made a deliberate decision to have all-female panels to look at these issues. But Angela, any quick reflections from you on this challenge?
Yeah, I think that basically what we're looking at two different prongs, so to say, two different ways. One is basically women also as contributors to the economy, as vibrant members of the workforce, for example, making contributions in a variety of issues. But also we're looking at development issues, or rather the shortages that women experience, not only due to COVID, but also because they're living in substandard conditions, or that they are discriminated against because of legal rights, that they are being deprived of, etc. So we have to look at various ways. And what I think as the positive is that when you look at the Mexico conference 45 years ago, that really focused on women in underdevelopment, we've come a long way since then, and we've come a long positive way. So now you basically have two focus areas, and that really is very, very important. When it comes to member states, and when we cannot afford to be pushed back or to lose the momentum that we have gained, I think what you really need to look at now is what can be done in terms of not focusing on women per se, but basically making it part of a mandate, for example. Have mandates given to women or given to women's issues in Security Council resolutions. And I was very interested because recently you had a resolution that was on women in peacekeeping. And that was proposed by Indonesia, I must say, and they were very successful in pushing it through. And that was a very nuanced discussion of women as actors. I mean, they were not talked about as being emphatic and, having basically a better way of dealing with people, etc. But it was really something that was very empowering as far as I was concerned, because it was a nuanced discussion of that. And that was, to my mind, a game changer. So if you look at what can be done in terms of the member states, that's really where I think, the action needs to lie in the UN, in the multilateral agenda. But the other issue that I have, look at some of the women who are leading countries. Denmark, New Zealand, etc. They are credited as actually the best ones dealing with the whole COVID situation. And that I think is very important. Angela Merkel. And Angela Merkel just, I think yesterday or today must have been because it's Monday, today she actually passed through a law and basically said, putting women on boards of commercial boards, that was a recommendation for, 7-8 years, 30% was the recommendation. She made it mandatory that it is now mandatory. So sometimes you have to stake measures and stake out positions that actually advance women tremendously. And whether it's done by a woman or whether it's done by a man, it doesn't really matter, but it really needs to be done to give the recognition to the women who are making a tremendous contribution.
Thank you. And that's actually moving us into the territory of some recommendations that we can take away. But I would love to bring in Annika. Now, thank you for waiting so patiently, and maybe move the discussion on from looking back over the last 25 years to looking forward. We're now at the stage where we're still obviously fighting and responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, but we're also really thinking about recovery plans. And I wanted to ask you, Annika, what do you think are the steps that we really need to take from a gender equality perspective? And how, in your work, have you found, what is the best way to make this case to policy makers and donors that this needs to be a priority, given all the other priorities that they could talk about, that this should be a core focus?
Right, thank you very much, Natalie, and quite an honor, basically, to be amongst this powerful panel. I think I have only met Nadine, and I was really privileged to step for the first time in Mexico to actually develop the blueprint of the Action Coalition themes. So as a young person, that is, the first step in moving forward, keeping or making deliberate steps to provide spaces for young people like me, young women, to be in these spaces, and hence the name Generation Equality, bridging the divide and bringing in the new wave of young feminist movements who feel like they don't know where the movement is or where to fit in or to plug in. Because, when our mothers marched and met in Beijing, there was a sense of purpose and a sense of community and a roadmap, if I may say so. And as time has gone by and people have grown up, there seems to be an emergence of new waves of activism and feminism that really are looking for a home. And I think you have all seen how that has manifested in the Me Too movement, where so many young people, old and young, could come down and say, you know, this is part of my story. This is what we dealt with moving forward. So Natalie, just referring to your question, you're asking about, you know, steps to take, making in making gender equality imperative. You know, I tend to feel that when we come to the civil society space, the development space, or the private sector space, we tend to kind of alienate the political space and look at the political space as problematic, as entangled, but we fail to realize that the political space directly impacts and affects our day-to-day living in the private space and in the civil society space. And in fact, if the governments and policymakers were able to do their work well, we actually would not really need the dire help from the civil society space. So I would go back and say that we need to be able to have a monumental shift in creating goodwill in the political system. We also need to have a shift in creating or centralizing the position of community-driven or community development organizations, community-based organizations, into the center of the pyramid as opposed to the bottom of the pyramid in terms of funding structure, resourcing structure, and communication. I say this because when a political party wins power, then they dictate the agenda, the policies, as Angela has just said, of that country. As such, a lot of generation equality relies on goodwill, as political goodwill, as we have seen in the efforts by the government of Mexico and the government of France. And noting also that generation equality has brought together government, civil society, private sector, philanthropists, youth-led organizations, which are a great mobilizing capacity, because it also is not enough to have these papers or these policies on paper in government shelves and bodies. We need to be able to have the effects of these policies trickled down to where, you know, we as people of the grassroots are able to feel those effects or even implement or hold our local leaders, our local governors to account in terms of, you know, where is the accountability? Because one of the major things that came out of the Beijing Declaration in 1995 was that there was a wave of change, that even if you didn't step Beijing, even if we were kids in the kitchen, we could hear women whispering like, things are changing. And this created women as agents of creating the agency of women, you know, as components of change. And this led to very many community-based organizations where women felt this is where I can do my activism and create change. So I really am passionate about ensuring that we put young women, the youth, the women constituency in areas that are able to shift policy, as Angela has just talked about with a very great example with Angela Merkel, but not just the end result, because we keep on focusing on women candidates or women councillors or women ministers. But there's a whole system that produces these women. And we need to ensure that we, in the civil society or in the generation equality mechanism, create a system that provides an amiable environment from the political parties' leadership, party primaries, systems, funders, and donors. Then the woman candidate will be just the end result of a well-planned out system. But many of us in most of our countries are doing it alone, because when you stand to run for office, you are at the mercy of a system that you do not really, you really cannot fight as hard as it would, as easy as it would be if you had that whole mechanism. So I'm very particular about ensuring that we create an amiable environment, because in 1995, the word gender mainstreaming became the blueprint of engagement for governments across the world. Every government talked about gender mainstreaming, but the implementation of gender mainstreaming was not felt as is up to today in the various, you know, policies, governments, and all that. We have it on paper, but not really in implementation. And we also have to change the narrative. If you talk about what can we do, we really need to change the narrative on feminism, because the young women of today are facing great ridicule, great backlash just for identifying and believing in feminism. It is very difficult for young women today, and those who do come out like me boldly and say, this is where I choose to stand, do it at a high social cost, social and political cost, if I may say so. So it is important that we also look at how to re-engineer the narrative, because it is not just socially, even economically in the workplace. The patriarchal narrative wants to dial back on the gains that we have made on gender equality by trying to re-engineer the narrative into why dare you be, why dare you challenge the system? Because gender equality is taking away the set powers, if I may say so, that men originally sat on, dominated upon, and ruled with, if I may say so. But we who were born in the wake of generation of 1995 were brought up in empowerment. But the boy child was maintained in patriarchy within the same household. So now as young adults in the workplace, in our advocacy, in our activism, we are seen to be fighting a kind of silent war that need not to be. So in policy, how about gender equality being part of our education curriculum? Our boys as well as our girls need to understand together that you do not take somebody's plate to the kitchen while somebody else sits down watching television. It's as simple as those tiny things, that if you are allocating land, for example, in my scenario, don't call the boys to the side and let the women, or the girls sit. So if we keep on preaching equity, but when we grow up, we go to our workplaces, we go to our private sectors in terms of business, and we still find that we still have to apologize or dial back or face ridicule for standing out and speaking out and identifying with feminism, then still we have a problem, even if we put effective policies in place. Thank you.
There's just so much I agree with there, and so much I want to follow up on. I think that was probably felt by every woman who was watching this, and probably quite a lot of men too. But I really want to bring in Nadine. I mean, thank you so much for waiting so patiently. And you've really been at the heart of this whole process, Nadine. And I wanted to put the same question to you as I did to Annika, from your perspective. How can we really ensure that the decisions that are taken now, which will have long-term consequences, we think at how much money is being spent now, types of choices we're making could have existential consequences when it comes to climate change. So how can we make the case that gender equality needs to be central to what we do in the coming weeks and months?
Thank you very much, Natalie, for your moderation. It is really very exciting to be with my colleague Marta, with Susana Malcorra, with Angela Kane, and with Annika. Great to see you again here. I think we need to reflect that the nature of the crisis caused by the pandemic has reminded us the need for mutuality and solidarity. We know now that we have the ability to allocate labor, resources, and equipment based not on the need to maximize profit, but based on prioritizing what is socially essential. We don't know how long this crisis will last, nor do we know how it will ultimately influence our perspective on what was once considered normal. And I totally agree. We have been saying that normal was not very good for women. So it is understandable for most people to wish for a swift return to the status quo. However, ignorance is no longer an option, and deep structural barriers to freedom and autonomy, particularly for women and girls, and especially for the most vulnerable groups of women, indigenous women, rural women, Afro-descendant, young women and girls, have been categorically exposed before us. Back to normal is no longer an option. Because, as I said, normal was decisively not safe place for many people, including and especially for women and girls. Let's ensure by working together that on the other side of this is fundamentally a different world, one created through active policy interventions that seek to restructure the current unequal state of the economy and society through the lens of gender equality. We must take active steps towards providing universal healthcare, improved labor laws, worker benefits, a living wage for women in order to provide them with necessary autonomy to protect themselves and their children. In the Mexican National Institute for Women, we consider that the following actions are crucial to advance our goals to achieve a real and sustainable gender equality. We need to listen to the needs of women. And the government of Mexico is listening, and we will continue to do so, attending especially to groups of most vulnerable women, as I said, in our country, indigenous, rural, Afro-descendant young and girls. The future must be collectively rebuilt. The future must be egalitarian, and we believe that working alongside with men is very important to achieve this. We need a world of solidarity, a world that provides opportunities for the local economy. And another point that is extremely important for us, and we're working very hard, is the reconciliation of work and family life. It starts with the recognition of the fact that men and women distribute their participation in the labor market and in the family unequally. And Annika gave fantastic examples. If we have strategies and concrete actions to promote the involvement and participation of both men and women in a balanced way, we will be taking a decisive step, not only in terms of production of economic growth, but also to generate conditions for a dignified life. And that's why building care systems that really promote this core responsibility between the state, the government, and the private sector, and the families, and investing in these issues that have to do with what we have been living at first hand in this pandemic, which is sustaining life, is so important. International cooperation and multilateralism must be in order of the day, as it has been said throughout this morning. Only through sharing successful experiences and effective practices can we hope to build a global community centered on values of non-discrimination and equality for all genders. And the Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals, have this at the heart. And only by upholding values, we can hope to reconstruct a world where all members of our societies can expect to live a dignified life and be afforded their inherent human rights. And that's the thrive and the commitment of the Mexican government, along with France and UN Women, to look into this crisis and to address them in this manner in the Generation Equality Forum. And we're really very grateful that we are able to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the UN, which has embodied and is embodying and has a great future if we continue putting at the center the needs of the most vulnerable and having a very strong gender agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadine. And it's also so nice to see, you know, the connection there with you and Annika. I think something that maybe in the past and still to some extent is difficult is, you know, really getting together different movements, different generations, but also different approaches, different sectors, and also different issue bases, you know, getting the climate, you know, movement to really cooperate with the gender movement and the peace movement, etc. So I might hopefully have time to ask a follow-up on that. But I just wanted to remind everyone watching, please do put your questions to the panelists in the chat for the live stream on the In Mujeres Facebook page and also the Join UN75 Facebook page. I'm going to have one more round of questions to all four panelists, maybe a quicker round. So if you could be a little bit brief in your answers, that would be great, and leave as much time for questions. But I wanted to ask you all, really talk about what's the one thing you really hope that we can achieve at the Generation Equality Forum to really ensure that it's not just another event. I mean, we heard from the Vice Minister about the action coalitions, about innovative approaches, something about the Global Compact, proposed for women, peace and security. So I'd just like to put that to you. What are you hoping that we can get from this? And let me go back to the beginning and to Susanna.
It's hard to nail down in just one objective, of course. And I was glad to hear that what we face is the challenge of the power struggle. We are fighting for power here. So we must remember that. We must not let go. But if there was one thing where I believe it would be important to bring about a conclusion or a proposal moving forward, that is on women's economic empowerment. I am deeply convinced that the women's economic empowerment is a make it or break it difference to really have the women sitting at the table with the right proportion. Today, we are clearly underrepresented on the decision processes, and many of them do not represent as well because of this idea that we are not fully sharing the economic activity as we should. Just to give an example, women's unpaid contributions in the type of work that women typically do, care work, not just health, unpaid care and domestic work, which is at the central of what women do, represents around $11 trillion, around 9% of the GDP of the world. We must find ways, governments must find ways to bring that to the forefront, to bring a form of recognition of that work, because that will empower women to move beyond where they are today, have their fair share on the decision-making processes, which, by the way, if we are well represented in the decision-making processes, public, private, in all levels, the decisions that will be taken will be more representative of the society and will really make a difference and have an impact on having a more sustainable and equitable society. So to me, that is the main objective that we need to put at the forefront.
Thank you. Angela, does this feed into your earlier point about the quotas?
Well, the quotas, but I think Susanna has already made a very powerful point about the economic empowerment, which I totally agree with. But I just was thinking about Annika's very passionate statement about, where we are. And, I feel sort of in a different generation, we've made some headway. But I want to give you two examples, which I think are also very important. And that is the visibility of women in high offices or in high positions, whether it's economic, whether it's political, it doesn't matter, is really, really important. And from my own experience, I joined the United Nations in 1977, a long time ago, I know. But this was after Beijing. And Beijing agreed on International Women's Day as a day where women should be remembered, talked about, etc. And as a consequences, there was a group in the UN that was formed of women, and we had a discussion every year on 8th March or shortly thereafter to basically ask the men in the organization, both from the secretariat, high ranking, and also from the missions, to say, why aren't there more women in powerful positions? And there was a woman who was our leader, and she was a D1, which is like upper, higher ranking, but not the top. And I think that she was so courageous, and I admired her so much because she would grill these men and she would sort of say, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And then it was always like, well, we didn't have enough candidates. And you mentioned the word, Annika, patriarchy, and that was not something that we talked at the time, but that's exactly what it was. And the UN, of course, is a very traditional place. And I'll give you another example, and that is that when the first Deputy Secretary General, who was a former minister from Canada, started working at the UN, she was all of a sudden wearing pants. And that meant that we women, started wearing pants. I cannot tell you what an impact that had. And you may think this is not important at all, but it was. It was for our image. It was for having a woman who dared to do something that was a little bit out of the norm. And that is really important when you have women as role models. Resolution 1325 or the gender issue never featured a lot in my portfolio professionally at the UN, but it has featured a great deal in my personal experience. And also, I have found that being here in Vienna now, I have participated in, must have been about 10 events here, which of course are broadcast all over the world. And that has made a tremendous impact in terms of we need to talk about it. And particularly the younger generation is extremely interested in pushing this forward. And when it comes to, we've seen this recently, women in elections, women who are exposing themselves because they want to be elected or whatever, they get criticized because of issues that have got nothing to do with their professional capabilities, that have got nothing to do with their political platform, that they are very personal. That needs to change as well. So we have a lot of work to do on a number of fronts. And that is basically one that I think visibility, but also women supporting women is extremely, extremely important. And we should never forget that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would definitely agree with those comments. Something that we've been talking about, just come up in a number of these panel discussions, is also the style of leadership and what we consider to be strong leadership nowadays and the traits. And I think still within the UN, to some extent, you have a very masculine set of leadership skills that are, traditionally masculine. Maybe the stereotypes are terrible, but there is a great deal I think we can learn also from the lessons of the 1990s, where you have a socially challenging agenda like Beijing that is adopted to great acclaim, and then a much more easier social development agenda at the Copenhagen summit that translated into more palatable policy prescriptions, I think. So there is that challenge, and I think it's still there today. Annika, how about you? I mean, what are you hoping for next year? What do you think we can achieve?
What I'm hoping for is what generation equality initially, the thought process that went into creating generation equality and what it hopes to achieve. What I have experienced, and many of my fellow young women tell me, is there was at some point a departure from the women's movement, and it kind of remained within the civil society, governments, those who do the work every day. What I am hoping to do is to regalvanize a global movement, a catalytic movement where each and every woman, young and old or girl, is aware that we have relaunched the women's movement. I want to create a home for any girl or any young person or any woman who feels like she has been left out to be part of this story of generation equality, to feel the sense that a new dawn has been launched, that existing in isolation or in ridicule is no longer going to be the story, and it will create just a new platform. And in addition, I would reiterate what Susanna said when I talk about putting money in the hands of young women. In order to move forward, to achieve the change that we want to see, we cannot have women sitting at a table where they do not have the negotiating power that their fellow men have, or other women have that they do not have. So we must be deliberate in creating a generation that is empowered economically, creating policies, mechanisms, budget lines, even within civil society. As in, the change starts from within us. If you have a panel, or if you have a project at the grassroots, ensure that you are able to put money in the hands of women. Because as Susanna said, the amount of work women do is unquantified and unpaid. And there's a glorification of volunteerism that comes at a very high cost to the empowerment of women and gender equality. So ensuring that we find mechanisms, working with private sector and philanthropists and governments to see how that happens, and reiterating, of course, powerful remarks by Angela there when she talks about the visibility. When I started in the women's in political parties, it was largely unseen because all women in politics were running for office. And I was in the opposite because I felt like when I ran, I didn't have a good environment. So I wanted to change the system, because when you're elected, for example, you see AOC in the United States, tied to the Republican or Democratic bureaucracies. I said, what if we are the ones who run these primaries and everything? So that's why I really put my foot in the systems of political parties to see how can we change the outcome, when I realized that in a whole panel of, let me say in Kenya, in 78 political parties, we have probably less than 5 party leaders who are women or chairpersons, and even less executive directors, people who actually make decisions. These are people who can mess up, your nominations and all that. And visibility, seeing people like us, is actually key, as Angela has said. I think that is what I want to see in Mexico next year and Paris. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Annika. And Nadine, it looks like you've changed location. Can you still hear us from where you are? I'm just asking about hopes for the forum.
Absolutely, and I'm sorry that this is the busy life we have, and we're working very hard. But this is a very important question. In fact, our vision of the Gender Equality Forum revolves integrally around the strength of the feminist movement and how important it is today to acknowledge their diversity, their strength, and the importance they have in shaping public policy, but also the public discourse. And as Annika said, it has very good for us, which are a little older, to see feminism being said without being afraid of for some after so many years is very interesting, but it has a price, as Annika said. It has become something that is being discussed, that is being challenged. So that's why after 25 of Beijing, we see the power of activism, and we see the efforts of advocates, and how important it is to have women in all walks of life, to be in the UN, to be in government, to be in private sector, and to promote that we take our space. That's why parity is so important, and the Mexican government is 50-50, Congress is 50-50, and you can see the difference. So we want to use this momentum to once again position activists as organizers of key issues, such as economic justice, as it has been said, but also environmental justice. And I think what the forum will bring is this space to organize, this space to dialogue, and this space to create a sense of action and need to accelerate change to ensure that we really become the humanity we want to be, that we can really achieve the sustainable development goals, that we can see a world when our young people, our girls have real options around the world. So that's why we are working so hard and even in these very difficult conditions to ensure that we have a space for meaningful discussions, for future looking, and being able to see the world we want and the world women and girls deserve.
Thank you so much. I will turn now to some questions. And just a reminder, if you want to ask a question, you can pop it in the chat. for the live stream, either on the Join UN75 Facebook page or the In Mujeres Facebook page. But I'm going to start with a very simple one, and I don't know who is the best place to take this, but we heard the question is really about the action coalitions. So we heard the Vice Minister speak about action coalitions. Could someone give us an example of what such a coalition looks like and what it can achieve? And I see Nadine wanting to come in there, so let me start with you.
Thank you very much. I get very excited because we have been working for so long on how these action coalitions should look like. First of all, I think we need to understand that the themes of the action coalitions are themes that are thought and come from a very wide discussion and consultation with all the stakeholders on what are these issues that if we invest time, energy, political will, and money could make a significant change in the lives of women around the world. And I want to take the example of the economic justice coalition, which is the one Mexico is leading with Sweden, Spain, South Africa, NGOs that go from feminists to unions, and we hope to have soon private sector, but also we're joined there by the Gates Foundation. These are spaces where we know economic justice is essential, and Susana Macorra has said it very clearly, as well as the other panelists. So what are the issues that will really make a difference if we change in the next 5 to 10 years? And issues like the care systems as instruments for to ensure that women have access to land, to resources. So that's the way the coalitions are being thought. The actions are now being developed by group. There are leaders that come from the government, civil society, philanthropy, and we hope to have soon the private sector. And the idea is to really push an agenda that can transform the lives of women around the world and have good practices, have investments, and really make a difference. That's the idea of the action coalitions.
Thanks so much, Nadine. And I want to come now and put a question to Susana Mancora, and it's a question about women's economic empowerment, but also about changing systems. And it's really about what can be done at the global level to improve, to global economic governance and economic policies. That's something that came through in the UN75 discussion a lot as well, because people talked about how can we transform the global economy, how can we, look at unpaid care work, quantify work in a different way. There's been lots of proposals on universal basic income that are coming through our initiative. And of course, the Secretary General has also talked about the idea of a global New Deal. So what do you think is possible?
Well, first of all, we need to be very, very ambitious to begin with. If we are not ambitious, remember, all the trends show that it will take more than 100 years, and now some are saying close to 200 years to get to parity. It's unacceptable. It's unacceptable from any point of view. It's unacceptable from the justice perspective, from the rights perspective, but it's unacceptable from the development, from the opportunities of growth that this world is missing. So I have no doubt that there is a need for a new social compact. A new social compact that not only has a gender lens, there are other lenses to take care of, but clearly 50% of the population needs to be properly represented in that new social compact. We need to have policies set in place that are forward-looking, that are progressive. The ways that things have been done so far, or the standard way we have been doing things, will not get us where we need to get. So that's the opportunity that we have before us when we discuss this fora where things really can generate the energy. If we generate the right energy, there is no question some of these ideas have been transformative and can be implemented fast. We need the IMF, we need the World Bank, we need the UN, we need the economic commissions, we need the regional banks to back this. And of course, we need the private sector. When you see from the private sector perspective that women are more than half the demand that is there from the market, clearly the private sector needs to understand that women are an opportunity. And that needs to be brought to bear in the way they establish their boards, in the way they're establishing decision processes. So all of this requires to aim high, to put in motion policies and thinking that are really different. And then we might not get everything, but if we don't aim high, we'll get nothing, no question.
Thank you for that. It's a valuable lesson indeed. Annika, I want to put a question I've got. It's nice that someone's actually left their name.
Can I just come in here for 1 second?
Oh, sorry, of course.
I really want to add something, because what Susanna said was really excellent, but there's one aspect that I think is also very important, and that is, again, coming back to women in politics. You need to elect more women to parliament. Right now, there are only 22% women are in parliament, and they are the ones who also make the laws. They make the laws about, whether you need to top up the pensions, or you need to provide, basic provisions, compensate for rearing children, etc. And that, to my mind, right now, the percentage that's increased is like 1% a year. So that's what Susanna said, it's going to take forever, that comes up to parity. But it really needs to make sure that whatever laws are there that need to be removed, changed, amended in order to benefit women, that really needs to go through parliaments and the governments. And that's where it can be very helpful if you have more women in government.
And a quick follow-up to you then, Angela, which combines a few questions on the leadership side, whether the UN itself has done enough. I mean, we have a success in terms of gender parity at the senior levels, but we haven't maybe had that much progress at the level just beneath that. And of course, we haven't had a woman actually in charge of the UN as well. So this combines a few questions, but what more can the UN do in terms of leadership and being an example?
This is, I think the Secretary General Guterres has done a great deal in terms of bringing actually women in senior positions to parity. But when it comes to the levels below that, and I mean, you yourself are now in the UN, know that very well, there's still a lot that needs to be done. What I have found, and I'm sure that Susanna feels the same, that if you are a woman and you are in a position where you can make a difference, you hire more women. There is a problem, of course, because you're supposed to have, according to the charter, hiring women and men in an equal sentence. But sometimes women are not given the same opportunities. How do you learn leadership? I mean, best is to be next to someone who actually is a leader, who actually executes programs, who can move things. And that is not always a chance that is being given to women. There can be a lot more done. I believe also that women can have more tutoring, if I can call it that. And I know it sounds a bit condescending, and I don't mean it that way, but it's like, you have to be able to speak more effectively. You have to be able to kind of stand your ground, that if you are in a sitting around a table and there's, let's say, 75% men and the rest is women, you make a point very often, and I'm sure all of us have experienced that a man will then repeat the point, and then they will come back to that and sort of say, oh yes, as such and such said, whereas you were the one who made the original point, which is extremely annoying. I'm sure we have all had that. So those are things that basically can be taught, and they should be taught, and that can make a great difference. But there need to be more opportunities given, equal opportunities for men and women to shine in particular assignments. And that I have seen has not always happened. And when you look at, for example, special representatives, not talking about the ASGs, USGs in the headquarters, but when you look at the field, there can be, to my mind, a lot more done to promote women into these leadership positions.
And I think it's an excellent point. And the challenge is also, how do you learn to speak up, but not incorporate and model maybe the types of behavior that we're also trying to, do away with in a way, and not become part of that system. So it is, yeah, it's a tricky balance, but one that can be, can definitely be achieved with more women in those positions. But Annika, I wanted to put this last question. I can take this round to you, because it's nice that someone actually put their name to a question. So this is from Alberto Zucconi, who said, how can the forum address the intersectionality approach, which takes into account women and girls in all of their diversity in more vulnerable situations? And I think this is a really pertinent question this year, when we've had very prominent movements from different whether it's racial justice, climate justice, gender justice. What do you think the forum can do?
Well, actually, this is quite a passionate question, because it is because of that question that the Beijing Plus 25 Global Youth Task Force transformed into now the Generation Equality Youth Task Force. Because initially it started, as a body to advise UN women on inclusion of youth. And what we championed for was not only intersectionality, but we said intergenerational and intersectional participation and representation of women and youth in all their diversities. So in this stead, it means literally leaving no one behind. And that's why the forum has started the public conversation, the curated conversations. And these are conversations for people outside of the generation equality space, the feminist movements, for people who we ask, do you know about generation equality? Have you heard of it? 90% of the people will say, I know about Beijing 1995, but they have not heard of generation equality. So even in the Generation Equality Forum, one thing that is key to achieving intersectionality is ensuring in the spaces of generation equality, in the leadership of generation equality, in the working groups of the action coalitions and the leadership of the action coalitions, that we endeavor to be as representative as possible. And as such, as Angela has said, some of these are traditional systems, or they are new systems created by the same traditional people. And some of these traits are carried on to one institution, to another, and another outfit. But I applaud the Generation Equality Forum in allowing the youth to hold them to account and to tell them, vet all these people, vet all these private sectors that are coming on board, and ensure that they are not violating, people at the grassroots. Let's allow or give an opportunity to the queer group of young people, the LGBT community, all these diversities and representations for persons living with HIV. And this is actually one of the major reasons that we expanded the task force, to ensure that when we sit in the Generation Equality Forum, we are actually as representative as possible for the minorities, for the indigenous people, and we have all these representations, even the persons with disability. So we have noticed that, of course, in Mexico, we may have not created the most perfect blueprint in the action coalitions. As you've seen, the women, peace and security component was left out of the 6 action coalitions themes. But in collective galvanization and mobilization, they have been able to create a group that holds generation equality to account. So if I would like to encourage all groups outside or across the world that, even the adolescent girl through Egypt and other various groups came together to create a collective to hold generation equality to account and ensure that all these are embedded. The voices of the adolescent girls are embedded within all the structures of generation equality. And we are very deliberate. I think Nadine will testify to the fact that the forum is very dedicated to leaving no one behind and ensuring that we listen to all the spaces and voices. The feminist movement encompasses a huge lot of people, from the political movements, from the grassroots movements, and leaving it open like that creates a home for everyone. And that goes back to what I said. We want to see generation equality create a home that is a global, movement for gender equality moving forward. So there is space for everyone. And now, as much as COVID has taken us back, it may be a context to not only build back better, but build forward better, because in some circumstances, the back really was not really good for women and girls in some areas. Some girls just never saw even the doors of school. So let's also change the narrative in building forward better and ensuring that, you know, no one is left behind. So I think that's what I would say to that. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you, Annika. And I think that is about as good a note as we can leave it on. You know, a very inspiring call to action there, and an important reminder about the need for intergenerational dialogue, the need for just, you know, collective action for accountability. So we can expand the tent and have other actors in, but only, you know, if we are really following the same goal. So thank you so much, everyone, for being so generous with your time and for such a substantive discussion. I normally try and have a question at the end, you know, what's your one recommendation to the Secretary General, etc. But actually, this discussion has been full of recommendations, from, you know, gender equality education as part of the curriculum to, you know, how to transform leadership and role models, women's economic empowerment, putting money in the hands of women, looking at the budget lines, new social compact. I mean, there's been a lot that we will capture. We have been recording this, and we will make sure that we try and take this forward. We have some interesting ideas coming out of the UN75 conversation, things such as a civil society champion, a future generations council, that I think actually sit really well with some of these ideas. So I'm looking forward to continuing the discussion with you all, and of course to the forum next year. I think at the start of the session, I said, you know, this year will not be remembered for being the 75th anniversary of the UN or the 25th anniversary of Beijing. But I think listening to everyone today and the ideas, I do believe that if we can somehow capitalize on this moment through the forum next year, through the follow-up to the UN75 process, then, you know, we can be hopeful that 2020 may come to be remembered as the year when we finally changed course towards that better future for all, that leaves no one behind, and that empowers women and girls. So thank you again to the government of Mexico. Thank you to InMujeres. Thank you, of course, also to the group of women leaders represented so wonderfully here today by Susanna and Angela. And thank you also, Annika and Nadine, for your excellent interventions. And thanks everyone for watching. You can find more info on UN75 at www.un.org/UN75. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye.